Hello, everybody, and welcome to Lions Lineup. I'm your host, Alex Zucker, and I'm joined here today by Joe Caputo and Joe Facile. We have a great show planned for you guys today. Our analysts will be debating selections for Major League Baseball's end-of-the-season awards, and there's many tight races across the board for us to discuss, so let's get to it. We're going to get to the awards first, and let's start with NL Rookie of the Year. Joe Facile, what do you think, man?
Well, I think almost the hands-down guy you have to give it to is Jose Fernandez, the outstanding pitcher from the Miami Marlins this year. 2.19 ERA. He's striking out more than a quarter of the batters he faces. For those of you who like the advanced stats, he's got a 4.2 in WAR, according to the way that Fangraphs calculates it. He's been outstanding. He's got 3 nasty pitches, and quite frankly, I don't see somebody who's more deserving than him.
I mean, I wouldn't go too far in talking about pitcher's WAR. Obviously, that is a very arbitrary stat.
Well, hold on, I just want to stop you right now. Can we just explain briefly to us what WAR is?
WAR is wins above replacement. It's how many wins you're adding to your team's value over the average minor league replacement. And a 4.2 WAR for Jose Fernandez over the course of a season. Yasiel Puig has posted a 4 WAR in only 98 games this year. He's been dominant since coming up to the Dodgers, taking over from when Carl Crawford and Matt Kemp went down. 327 average, a 404 weighted on base average for those sabermetricians. He's been just spectacular. I mean, it's really hard to make the debate pitcher against hitter, but what Yasiel Puig has brought to the Dodgers is nothing short of spectacular. I mean, 18 home runs. He stole 11 bases. He's bringing them everything to the table. He's playing every day, leadoff hitter. I know he's had a little problem in the field, but
yeah, he's certainly had his issues in the field. He's got some other issues as well. He might not have the highest baseball IQ, but when you look at Jose Fernandez on the mound, you look at a guy who's got the seasoning of a veteran way past his prime. He's 20 years old. Was pitching an A-ball last year, and to be doing what he's doing, especially on a very bad Miami Marlins team, is beyond impressive. And I can see the argument.
No, I agree with Fernandez, but do you think that the fact that he's 20 years old matters in this case?
I think he's got a point there, Joe. I mean, age, as we all know, is only a number, and these production numbers definitely matter more.
It's not like Puig is an old man right now. He's only 22 years old himself. It's a hard debate to make. Like I said, pitcher versus hitter is nearly impossible. I see where you're coming from with Fernandez, but we haven't seen Puig's numbers from a rookie since
Mike Trout. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And we'll get into him. We'll have plenty to talk about Mike Trout later in our show. We got to move on, guys. So we'll move from the NL to the AL. Who is your AL Rookie of the Year? Joe, we'll start with you this time.
I think we agree on this one. There really is no option here. I mean, Will Myers, since he came up, obviously coming over to Tampa Bay in the James Shields trade, and Tampa Bay obviously needed to improve their hitting, and they have with Will Myers. He's fit right into the middle of that lineup, hitting behind Evan Longoria, and it's not a by default pick because Myers has had a great year, but there's really no one else in the American League that you can make the argument for. Joe, do you agree?
Yeah, I agree as well. It's hard to imagine another guy in the AL who's more deserving than Will Myers. He's got an 832 OPS, shown some decent pop. He's got the 13 home runs, of course. What he's been giving to that Tampa team has been a nice spark, like you said, guy to come in, hit behind Longoria, give him a little protection in the lineup, and really just give them yet another weapon with Zobrist, Longoria, and now Will Myers. It's going to be a bright future.
He really pushed them over the top. That offense, it was a little suspect.
It was average, and you add him in there, and he just adds so much more.
I can't believe, with all these papers I have here, I did not print out Will Myers' numbers.
Well, either way,
I'm glad that Joe had him.
It looks like he's got a very bright future for the Rays, so we'll see how he progresses in the coming year. But I have to agree with you guys on that one. So let's talk about managers, guys. Now, there's a lot of debate in baseball that, well, really in any sport, that the manager in baseball is the least important coach, if you will, compared to any of the sports. Compared to a football coach, hockey coach, basketball coach. Do you guys agree with that?
Yeah, I do. Okay. I don't think the managers really have much to do with anything.
Nothing.
And I really don't like Manager of the Year award. I think it's just kind of a gimmicky thing.
We'll start with the NL, Joe. If I
had to give it out, I'd give it to Clint Hurdle. I mean, how could you not? The Pirates making the playoffs first time since the early 90s. I don't know how much he actually had to do with that, but I think it's just a by default pick, and it seems like the most surprising team in the league usually provides the Manager of the Year every year. So I'll give it to Clint Hurdle.
Joe, what do you think?
Well, I disagree with you a little bit on the importance of managers in baseball. You look at it, and maybe they don't affect how well the players play on the field as much as some other ones do, but it's the way that you implement those players. You look at a guy like Bob Melvin out in Oakland with all the platoons that they run out there. That's something that not a lot of managers would do, and they've had great success doing it. And you got to give some credit to him. Obviously, give some credit to Billy Beane too for putting those.
I agree with you, but the stats are there, so it's not like these guys are making whim decisions. The stats are there for them. I mean, you're lefties batting .350 against a righty, you're going to play.
But also, you look at a guy like Joe Madden down in Tampa with the way that he utilizes defensive shifts to help, cut down on the chance of opposing players get a hit. That's another thing that the manager does that has an effect on the game.
Well, listen,
Getting
you guys,
back to the topic at hand, I agree with you. Clint Hurdle's the next.
before we go to the AL, you guys are both sabermetricians, if you will. Do you think there ever could be, or is there, that I personally don't know of, a sabermetric way to evaluate managers in terms of in-game decisions? Could there anything like that ever be developed?
I've heard a lot of backlash from sabermetricians about the way Dusty Baker has managed the Reds, the way he's put together the lineups, and I think the major thing that's going on right now in baseball is the movement against sacrifice bunting. And managers that are not bunting as much, I think those are the managers that are getting the most credit from sabermetricians. Dusty Baker sacrifice bunts a lot. There's a lot of people hate him in the sabermetric.
Why? All right. Well, why do they hate him for that, though? I mean,
what the argument is, and this is something that if you follow maybe a Brian Kenny on Twitter, you pay attention to what he says, you'll see this thrown around a lot. It's that you're giving up outs. There's all kinds of fancy other stats that are, win probability added or subtracted by the certain plays, and that's what they base it off of. But in the end, there is a group over at Baseball Prospectus, I believe, who have worked towards developing kind of a manager's version of wins above replacement. But at this point, it's hard to tell the impact of it. So it's
hard to tell.
It's not something that's going to happen soon.
It'll happen in the future, I think. But
it should be interesting to see where if it does happen and what it ends up to be. So before we go to break, guys, who would you say would win the AL Manager of the Year if it was up to you?
John Farrell, without a doubt. John Farrell has done an amazing job turning around that Red Sox team from the just complete dysfunction that they were last year. 69 wins. Yeah, they had some talent. They added some new talent in Mike Napoli, Shane Victorino this offseason. But to go from where they were last year to running away with the AL East this year is absolutely incredible.
I agree. I mean, a year removed. So you remember how bad they were last year, the Red Sox? I mean, they were terrible. And they didn't really bring in that big of
they brought in Shane Victorino.
Shane Victorino,
was pretty much it, right?
Johnny Gomes, Mike Napoli. I mean, not huge pieces, but they've been able to get the job done. And like I said earlier, if a team performs that much better than expectation, the manager is likely going to win. Yep.
I think you're right. I think, and that's what will likely happen because in the AL there aren't really any other major options you could go to because Detroit is back. Jim Leon's a good manager. Oakland's back in the playoffs. There aren't really any other significant teams you can go with and managers like that. All right, well, that's a great discussion, guys. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back with much, much more, including AL, NL, Cy Young, as well as the MVP for each league. Should be a great discussion. Don't go away. We'll be right back. And welcome back, everybody, to our Baseball Awards edition of Lions Lineup. I'm Alex Zucker, once again here with Joe Vasile and Joe Caputo. We're going to move on to the NL Cy Young Award winner. Mr. Vasile, what do you think?
Clayton Kershaw. I don't see anyone else in the National League who's a guy that could really challenge him for that. I mean, maybe if Matt Harvey had been able to stay healthy the whole season, he would have been a challenger. But once he went down, Clayton Kershaw has absolutely been running away with it. He's got a 1.88 ERA on the season.
You can't argue with that, right? I
mean, you honestly can't. It's very impressive what he's doing. All of his peripherals, the sabermetrics, all support that that's not a fluky 1.88 ERA and that he really has been pitching that well. It's hard to make an argument for anyone but Kershaw.
No, it really is. And I really thought that Matt Harvey was going to make a run at this thing if he stayed healthy. I was actually supportive of Matt Harvey the entire year. I really thought that he had a shot to win the thing, and I thought that he was a little overlooked even when he was healthy because of Kershaw's sparkling ERA, because Harvey's peripherals were very good. He had a better K to walk ratio than Kershaw before he got hurt. Adam Wainwright is in this thing, in the discussion. Cliff Lee's in the discussion, but no one's taken down Clayton Kershaw. 1.88 ERA. You don't see that in this day and age. I mean, I know the offensive numbers are coming down.
I believe that's the lowest since Pedro in '99.
That's insane. And his WAR, even though pitcher's WAR, it does support it, and nearly a strikeout, 9 strikeouts per 9.
And just what's his record, Joe?
His record is 15-9.
Okay, which is good, but you would think with those numbers it'd be even better.
And notice how Joe and I did not reference his record.
I just want to let her view yourself. But let me just ask you guys one quick question before we move on. Could you argue that he has been this season for him has been the best pitching season for a starter in the last, say, 15 years since Pedro's? I mean, he hasn't
Maybe
won
in
20 games,
the last 15 years, I'd have to look at it.
The strikeout numbers are a little lower than.
I'd say there's a couple of seasons. There's a couple of seasons from Roy Halladay in there that you have to look at. A couple of seasons from Cliff Lee, some Verlander years that are in the mix. But this is certainly it's up there.
My issue is that Justin Verlander won the MVP a couple of years ago, and
which a lot of people
and
disagree
he had and Kershaw's easily having a better year than Verlander did, and I don't agree with the whole pitcher getting the MVP thing anyway, but
they have their own.
Kershaw's. I mean, I guess he could win the MVP, but I don't think he's going to.
I agree. Yeah. All right. Well, let's move on to the American League. We'll start with Mr. Caputo this time. Joe, who's your American League Cy Young Award?
I mean, obviously I'm a Scherzer fan, so there were a lot of guys that I went through here: Felix Hernandez, Yu Darvish, Chris Sale, Max Scherzer, and even Anibal Sanchez. I know he's got a few less innings than the rest of the guys, but he's in there as well. I settled on Yu Darvish. I mean, he's leading the league in strikeouts per 9 by a landslide. 11.78 strikeouts per 9 is ridiculous. He is walking a few more guys than the other competitors that he has, but a 2.81 ERA to go along with those 11.8 K per 9. I mean, that is nuts. Even his peripherals, a FIP of 3.24, fielding independent pitching.
Can you explain what that?
Basically, how he would have done with the league average defense, and also takes into consideration strikeouts, walks, and ground balls. He's the best. I think if I had to put a guy in second there, I would say Chris Sale. And with an 11-13 record, Zook.
Here we're going back. I don't know why you guys are piling on the host on this. I'm just sitting here trying to engage in this debate.
He's the one.
I'm just surprised, Joe, and I want to give you credit because at the beginning of the year you told me that Max Scherzer, who had a career ERA of 4, I think, going around there going into the year, would have a better season than Justin Verlander coming off a Cy Young Award.
I believe he said that on this very program in our previous.
I have to give him credit because he was straight on with that. Scherzer has been unbelievable this year, and Verlander has not been. But I want to hear what Joe has to say about the American League Cy Young Award.
Well, I agree that it's going to be Yu Darvish. I got a couple other things here that Joe didn't touch upon. That the strikeouts, the actual number of strikeouts that Darvish has had this season is the most for a pitcher since 2009, when Justin Verlander had the same number. But Verlander did it in 40 more innings than Darvish has done it so far. So the rate that he's been striking out guys, the fact that opposing batters are hitting 182 against him on the season just speaks to how dominant he's been. He's been throwing the slider a lot more than he ever has, and that's been a real big reason for his success because that is a nasty pitch.
He's averaging almost 12 strikeouts for every 9 innings. That's just about incredible.
That's unheard of for. That's unheard of.
Just double digits in that. Is already good. 11.7.
He's the only one in the American League, I think, that is in.
I believe the league average is 7.7 strikeouts per 9 innings.
Well, listen, before we go on to MVP, I just want to ask you guys, and you guys have been piling on me about mentioning the pitcher's record. Why do you guys just kind of throw that under the table when it comes to these discussions? You got a guy like Sale who's 11-13. He's lost more games than he's won.
Well, look
why
at
is he?
look at the
no, I'm just
lineup.
listening. But why is he? Why does not matter?
Look at the White Sox lineup. I mean, who's in the lineup? Who's scoring runs for that team? I mean, if his ERA is, let me check it here.
What's his run support for
2.97, and you have Max Scherzer, who is 3.03 runs lower than Scherzer. Why is Scherzer 20-3 and Sale's 11-13?
Well, what do you happen to know how many runs per game on average they're getting?
I do not off the top of my head, but I would imagine that the Tigers are scoring way more runs than the White Sox.
You can look that up relatively easily, but not only is it kind of unreliable, as you said, so much of it relies on how much your offense can do to support you. But also, you see a lot of times guys pitch great games and get no decisions. I think back to a start that Matt Harvey had against the Chicago White Sox earlier this season. He went 9 innings, allowed 1 hit, didn't walk a batter, and struck out 13 or 12.
Wow.
And got a no decision.
I think
now, that's only one case. Now, there could be a scenario where he pitches 5 innings, gives up 6 runs, and they score 8
why
for
should
him,
you
and he
leave
gets
it up
the
to
win.
that?
Well, you shouldn't. But
it's not indicative of how the pitcher pitched.
This is what I will say. It definitely should not matter as much as those other stats like K per 9, ERA, hits, walks.
The reason is because it's something that, for a large part, is out of the pitcher's control. And looking at the
large part though,
looking at the strikeout numbers, looking at the walk numbers, the hits allowed, things like that. Those are more within the pitcher's control. than say how many runs his team scores on a given day.
I hear it. Well, listen, I agree with you guys. It definitely doesn't matter as much as the stats. I just think it's disingenuous to just throw it under the table and not even mention it, because it still is a stat that is kept. And at the end of the day, we're just trying to. The only stat that matters is wins and losses
for the team.
Yes, for the team, and that's the goal. Your team players. You're not playing for yourself. You're trying to win the game. So just to throw the record out to me is wrong. But we'll have to agree to disagree on that. All right, let's move on to our last award category, if you will, the MVP for each league. We'll start with the NL MVP, which I believe will foster much less debate than the American League MVP.
I think so.
But let's get it out of the way first. Joe, NL MVP.
Andrew McCutchen. Easily. He's been the best player on the Pittsburgh Pirates this year. A huge cog in their turnaround of that entire franchise, as well as Clint Hurdle and a bunch of other guys as well. Just to throw out some stats for him this year, he's been a 988 OPS on offense. He's played good defense. He's played good, made good decisions on the base paths. He's a legitimate star player, and I don't think there's many other guys in the National League who give you the complete package the way that Andrew McCutchen
And
does.
he got his team to the playoffs for the first time since the 1990s. Just throwing that out there.
Who cares about
Joe?
We'll get more to that, I guess, in a second. But Andrew McCutchen deserves the MVP this year, leading the league in WAR. Matt Carpenter and Paul Goldschmidt, I would say, are the other two that I would throw in the mix.
Yep.
Carpenter's been great in all aspects. I mean, I don't know where he came from, but
I would agree. I would agree with Carpenter and Goldschmidt being up there as well, and to even throw another guy in there. If he'd have been able to stay healthy, I think David Wright would be in the conversation too. But he's played 108 games as of today. So.
Yeah, David Wright was having a good year. Not much else to say about McCutchen. He doesn't strike out. He walks a heck of a lot. As Joe said, over a 900 OPS is amazing, and the weighted on base is up near 400 as well, which is outstanding.
Guys, something to consider. If Yasiel Puig had played the entire season and put up comparable numbers as he's done in the
he would definitely be up.
How many games has Puig
he's
played?
played
This year?
98.
98 games.
So let's say he
would be in the conversation if he kept.
Would you
the
put
same
him higher than McCutchen, or just?
It's hard.
It would be tough.
If
It's
he had
hard
the
to
same
say.
exact numbers on a
exact same
162 game
numbers,
scale, maybe. I would have to look at it deeper, but maybe.
Joe, would you agree with that?
I would say yes.
Okay.
If it was over 162 game scale of what Puig has done to this point,
You put him higher than McCutchen.
I would put him higher than McCutchen.
Well, we'll see. We'll see if Puig can find a way to win that award next year. He's obviously a very talented player. McCutchen as well. McCutchen probably deserves it this year, but we'll see what happens next year. All right, we have finally gotten to, I think, what we've all been waiting for on this program, the AL MVP.
Or at least you two.
And it should be interesting. There's been, and this happened last year. You
Yes,
had the
it
whole
did.
Mike Trout versus Miguel Cabrera debate.
It was actually closer last year.
It was
than
closer
this
last year, which
But-
I was going to say. You're making an argument for me. Joe, why do you believe the guy that you think
Okay,
should
let
be
me just
MVP?
throw out a disclaimer right now. I am not picking who I think will win. I'm thinking who I think should
Absolutely.
win. And
if it was up to you, who would you?
if it was up to me, it would be Mike Trout. Miguel Cabrera is going to win. Don't get me wrong. And the voters are dumb for thinking that. But okay.
Well,
You see-
let's give them the benefit of the doubt till the votes come in.
Even though they've been doing, voters have been voting and writing about this for what,
Yes,
20
but,
years?
Yes, but you know what? I mean, the league is changing. You have to change with it. Mike Trout, 25 points lower in average, correct?
Correct.
Okay, Zook, what's worse if you're hitting? Making 2 outs or making 1?
Making 2 outs.
Okay, you know how many double plays Cabrera grounded into this year?
How many?
many?
Joe?
17. You know how many Trout grounded into?
3.
8. All right.
Okay, it's actually not as big of a difference as I thought there would
Zook,
be.
what's worse, getting on base or not getting on base?
Not getting on base.
You know,
You know
how many times Trout reached on an error?
You're going to give Trout credit for reaching out an
You know
error?
how many?
Really?
Did he get on base? Did he not?
Yes, he did.
11 times. You know how many times Cabrera did it?
How many times?
1. You factor those things into their averages. Cabrera's hitting 341. Trout's hitting 338.
So wait. So explain that again. So if you take away those 11 errors that factored in,
There's
explain
obviously a skill to it. If Trout
Yeah.
could do it 11 times and Cabrera could do it once.
so you're saying his speed got him on base?
Yes. So
Okay.
if you
I don't think that
Really,
it's
that's a
the
convincing
reaching on
argument,
an
though?
error
Like,
yes, the speed
Right, you gotta
factors
let him
into it
finish,
a
yeah,
lot, but also it's not necessarily something you can rely on fielders
No,
making
no,
errors.
you can't.
It's not something. It's like hit by pitcher.
But you got to remember,
It's like getting hit by a
you gotta
pitcher.
remember,
It's not something you can rely on.
You got to remember that reaching on an error is counted against a player's average and his on base percentage, even though he got on base.
Yeah.
So whereas a double play where you're making 2 outs is only counted for 1 out. I mean, I'm just
So even if you
just the
factor
top-
in those 20 or so.
They're now
type.
basically batting the same average. Now you go further down the line, and obviously I'm only doing offensive stats right now because defensively and base running wise, we know who's a better
agree,
player.
yes.
Okay, and by
I've got
far,
the numbers on
by
those.
far, and Joe will give you those in a second. But the on-base percentage, even without those numbers that I just gave you with the reaching on error and the double plays, 446 to 432. It's really not that bad.
It's pretty much a wash.
It is, and the weighted on base is a little bit in Cabrera's favor, 460 to 424. I mean, I'm not seeing drastic
little bit.
difference.
I'm seeing drastic difference.
I'm not.
I'm seeing 18,
How is
18
Joe,
additional home
Joe.
runs, 25 extra points in batting average.
Weighted on base.
50 more
It's
RBIs. That's not significant.
Who cares about RBIs?
Joe.
I think a lot of
Does
people care.
Does
Isn't
Trout
that-
control who's on base in front of him?
But he hasn't produced as much as Cabrera has, significantly.
I don't know what produce means.
Driving in runs.
How can
Putting
you
runs
drive
on
in
the
a
board.
run if there's no one on base for you to drive in?
So what's the better stat then? RBI percentage?
It's a little bit better, I guess, but it's also a little bit.
But what about the
arbitrary
18
as
home
well.
runs? 18 more home runs.
That's a very significant stat.
Okay.
But
All right.
it's factored into to slugging and weighted on base.
Okay. Which Cabrera has higher.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I just
But
wanna make
also,
sure.
also you have to keep in mind, Joe, weighted on base is pretty much on an on-base percentage scale. So a 460 weighted on base is the equivalent of, say, a 460 on base percentage in terms of how impressive it is.
It's very.
So
no,
there
I'm not-
there
I'm
is
not
there is a big
discounting
gap
how
between
impressive
Cabrera
it
and
is.
Trout.
But 430 for Trout is nothing to laugh at either.
Absolutely not.
I'm just making the argument that Trout's offensive numbers, the gap between him and Cabrera, are not enough to say that his defensive and base running numbers are insignificant. I actually think that the gap in base running and defense between them is bigger than the gap.
That's true,
on
but
offense.
defense and base running doesn't matter as much as offense. It's as simple
How
as that.
can you
Well,
say
that's
that?
not
They
necessarily
don't.
true.
How can you say that?
That's not
Well,
necessarily
not
true.
necessarily, but these guys make
Not
their
even
money
close.
to produce offensively. You know, so
Yeah, but
That's
it's not.
the old
It's
school way
the
of
award.
thinking, though.
But Alec, the award is not best offensive player. It's
true.
It's
They have the
most
Silver
valuable
Slugger.
player.
But here's the thing. In my opinion, and other people who support Cabrera to win the MVP, they would rather have those additional 18 home runs, the additional RBIs, and the higher average than 30 stolen bases and better defense in the outfield.
There was a game, Yankees-Tigers, back in
Yes, you told me about
July.
this game.
Cabrera, the Tigers were down 2-0. Cabrera hit a 2-run homer in the ninth to tie the game. Bottom of the ninth, Brett Gardner hits a ground ball to third that Cabrera couldn't field. Yankees win the game 3-2. Did the home run matter?
Well, they lost the game, but
Exactly.
he didn't make the play. Okay, all right. Well,
So-
Trout certainly lost a lot of games.
But
this
that's
year, right?
just
Maybe not directly.
that's a perfect example of how a bad defense could negate good offense.
Yes, but how many times has that happened to him this year? Not many times. He's certainly
Not
hit so many home
directly,
runs.
but
you can't use the one example as the cornerstone.
I'm just
of the
giving
argument.
you
I
a
understand.
broad
I believe
example.
It happens.
Miguel,
it happens. Is he a
I-
terrible fielder, Miguel?
Yes,
he
yes,
is.
he's awful.
Yes,
he's
he
awful.
is.
He's
He's awful.
absolutely awful.
He is one of the worst fielding third basemen in baseball, if not the worst. I know this just off the top of my head because I was looking this up the other day. He has had this season negative 17 defensive runs saved at third base.
And how does that determine? Negative 17. How do you exactly determine if you're costing a run lane? Let's hear.
Because they figure it all out by the amount of balls that you get to that are in your zone, how many plays you make outside your zone. So say, the average third baseman would get to, say, the Brett Gardner ground ball.
But how do you determine
that would count
though?
against it.
How do you determine what the average third baseman would get to? What is the
Because
average zone?
because
There's a lot of-
because you analyze because you look at all the plays made by third baseman, and then you say, well, here's what the average third baseman does.
So the people that are making these numbers have seen a lot more games than you.
and they've seen more games than you guys as
Yes.
well.
Yes,
So,
but I respect the numbers. You don't.
I'm not saying I don't
It's a-
respect them. I
Zoom.
just think. But listen, let me say one thing.
It's not like they're making it up out of
I
nowhere.
know. I'm just saying there's a
There's a
level
whole-
of
there's a whole
there's a level
formula
of
and
subjectivity in there
things
that
to it.
to me is given too much weight in the WAR stat and in some of the other stats. Whereas if it's close, you have to give the guy with the more counting stats the benefit of the doubt. But it comes down to this argument that you guys were making was stronger last year because their offensive they were more comparable offensive. Now Cabrera won the
Trout should
Triple
have won
Crown.
last year too, though.
But the argument this year, it's the exact same argument. It's not as strong as it was last year.
I think it's
So-
just as strong. Trout has had just as good of a year this year. He's actually been a
Cabrera's
little
been
bit
better.
than he was.
He's been
Cabrera's
better
been better
than he was
offensively,
last
but he's
year.
been worse in other regards.
Okay, he's made a few more errors and he hasn't stolen any bases. So what?
I agree that Cabrera has been better offensively this year.
Significantly.
Significantly better offensively, sure. I'll grant you that. And even if you look at the advanced stats, that'll show you that he's been much better this year than last year. But still, Trout, the gap is that big between the two of them. That even
Defensively
the
and base
great
running.
even the great accomplishments of Cabrera this year over last year still doesn't make up everything between him and Trout.
Well, the last question I'll ask you guys is, if you guys are right, and I think there are certain numbers that back up what you've been saying, why is Cabrera likely to win it again when the argument is not as...
Because people like you are voting.
I'm not voting.
But people
But
like
people-
you are
Okay,
voting.
so what
I'll
is wrong
rephrase
with
that
the way...
in a
so what is wrong with the way I'm
different
thinking?
I'll rephrase it in a different way. You've got guys who are voting who are of another generation, of an older generation. They're used to looking at the same stats that you're used to looking at. And, you get sometimes where people, they see new things come up, they don't like them too much. Eventually, maybe, they'll come around. But for now, while it's still kind of in its infancy and just while the movement is starting to
Doesn't have as much
slowly
credibility.
gain up some popularity, right now there's still some resistance to moving over. And that's why it'll probably end up being Cabrera. But if you
One
if you
guy I
looked at
think
it
we
this
let's
way.
I just want to give him credit. Chris Davis has had an outstanding year as well.
He has.
Over
He's being
50 home
overshadowed.
runs.
That being
You know,
said,
let's just-
who's your pick for MVP, Joe?
Who's going to win or who I think's going to win?
Who's going to win?
Cabrera. is gonna
Cabrera.
win.
All right, well,
I'm going with Trout anyway.
this is and I would go with Miguel Cabrera, who will win the award. Guys, it was a great show. I'm glad we had this discussion. I think we've hopefully enlightened a lot of our viewers on these very complicated sabermetrics that these guys abide by. Personally, I'm just looking at the basic stats, but there's more to those stats than meets the eye, and I'm glad to have this new way of thinking that hopefully, or maybe hopefully not, will take over the league in the next few years, as you guys are saying. So any last words before we wrap
No,
up?
Zuke, that's it. That's all I can
All right,
say.
guys. Well, that will do it for this edition of Lions Lineup. Remember, if you are interested in joining LTV, be sure to email us at ltv@tcnj.edu. And don't forget to like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter. For Joe Caputo, Joe Vasile, I'm Alex Zucker. For everyone here at LTV, we hope you have a great week. Take care, everybody.